was it Wednesday? Yeah. Well, bonus session on Wednesday. Well, we'll just use a big picture overview, semester-y kind of stuff. But today, yeah, we'll just finish up, have fun, work our way through the rest of Frega's On the Thought. And this will be a good opportunity to actually hit some stuff because he today uses a lot of weird ideas in Kant, some stuff in pragmatism, some stuff in like he's sort of going all over this place in ways that really interestingly touch on some stuff that we've been discussing throughout the whole semester. So it'll be a good chance to maybe remind ourselves of some of the cooler, the bigger ideas that we've talked about so far. So yeah, I will go as long as we go today. I mean, we don't have to go the whole session necessarily. This is mainly just for fun because people wanted it. So anyone have anything they want to start with? Questions, comments, anything?
So this is so I kind of brought this up in our metaphysics class, but I'm gonna bring it up here because it's relevant. Like, can we talk about the interaction of the third realm with the world of forms? Because I mean that's extremely.
You mean like so like the outer world and the thought?
Yeah.
Outer world and thought. Yeah. Yes, we will talk about that. He doesn't talk about it much. And indeed, it's the main question that I was actually left with from this. It's basically the difference between what he's doing and Plato's theory of the forms is that Plato's theory of the forms is a causal account fundamentally. What he's doing is not intrinsically causal. But so yes, we will by the end of the day at least hit upon that. We need to say a few things first before we can. We really need to understand all this, why he starts talking about the I, why he spends so much time talking about what is meant by I. And because that's what's going to give us our hint into the way in which thoughts are causally related to the world. And it's going to be weird. there indeed is a causal link between thoughts and the world, and it's going to be through this medium of the I, or medium might not be the right word, but through this I. Maybe medium is the right word, actually. I don't even know. All right. Good. So yeah, we will get there, but not yet. We will get there by the end of the day, though. Any other starting things? All right, then let's just begin. Let's review what we talked about the last couple times. So last time I just introduced this idea in Frege that we basically have sort of like a 3-level ontology that he's left us with. We've got sort of this inner world. So this is the Cartesian stuff. This is all the Descartes stuff, right? This is fundamentally the content of this inner world are ideas. And by ideas, again, just a reminder, what he means is whatever pops up in your head when I say the word triangle. That's an idea. Whatever just popped into your head, that was an idea. Or whatever pops into your head when I say the sentence, the length of the hypotenuse of the triangle is equal to the length of the two shorter sides squared, added together. Right? I said the Pythagorean theorem, in effect. Whatever popped into your head when I said that, that is your idea. Right? It is always your idea. It's private. Right? Or I use a slightly different word for this. It's relative. Right? One of Frege's big targets is relativism. And he's going to give us actually a really, I think, interesting way of talking about what relativism means here. Relativism means relative to you or relative to something. So your ideas are relative in that they are literally relative to you. They only make sense in reference to you as the one who's having the idea. So your idea of the Pythagorean theorem has literally nothing to do with my idea of the Pythagorean theorem insofar as they're both ideas. Right? Because one idea only is an idea in reference to me. The other is only an idea in reference to you. And let's say I was Professor X, I was a telepath and I could read both of your minds. Then both of your ideas are no longer your ideas. Now they're my idea of your ideas in my mind. Right? And so it's relative to me again. There's no universalized or objective standpoint from which an idea could be judged to be anything related to any other idea besides within the mind of a given person, within the consciousness of a given person. And so as a result, it makes no sense whatsoever to talk about the correspondence of ideas with the outer world. That's just literally nonsensical if he's right, because the outer world isn't relative to us. The outer world is what it is completely independently of us. And so there's not even any meaningful sense of correspondence besides the fact that the outer world doesn't have anything in common with ideas. Outer things weigh things in the outer world, but my ideas don't have weight. Not even my idea of weight weighs anything. My idea of red doesn't, is not itself a red object, right? I mean, so, you know, there's no correspondence here, and everything in the inner world is born in or by a consciousness. Right? Everything is within some mind, and if you killed me, all of my ideas disappear. Or I fall asleep, all of my ideas disappear if I'm not dreaming. Right? The world of ideas, the inner world, is entirely dependent upon the one doing the thinking of it, or the thinking in the Cartesian sense, not in his sense of thought. Right? That's everything in the inner world is there. We then have an outer world, which is what he has the least to say about. The outer world is made up of objects. These objects are perceptible, they're sensible, so we can perceive them, sort of. It's a little bit more complicated, it's going to get weirder, but we perceive them in a sense anyway. Each of these objects has various kinds of properties, and all of this is completely consciousness independent. It's completely not relative. Right? The existence of my car has nothing whatsoever to do with my consciousness. And indeed, that car will never be in a consciousness. It will never be, maybe an idea of it is in my consciousness, but the car itself will never be in my consciousness, or indeed in any consciousness. Last, we've got the new level, right? The level, I mean, in a sense, it bridges the gap, but in a sense, it's just different. It's just a third level on top of these. We have the level of thought. These thoughts are what are expressed by sentences. Thoughts cannot be perceived. They're atemporal, non-spatial, unchanging. They're public in the sense that they can be discussed amongst people. They're not born by any consciousness. You put it this way, kill every single human being in the Pythagorean theorem, the thought of the Pythagorean theorem remains true, even if every single human being dies. But thoughts, unlike objects, can be in consciousness by this thing that he calls apprehension. This activity where you sort of like, you apprehend a thought, you stand in a certain kind of relationship to it such that you understand it maybe. Now, it doesn't have to be the case, and indeed there are many true thoughts that no one apprehends as a purely just empirical question. But it is possible for us to apprehend a thought, whereas it is not possible for us to apprehend an object. At best, we can perceive an object, and our perception of the object is just an idea of that object inside our minds. And so lastly, then these thoughts are discovered, they're not created. We don't make them up, they pre-exist us. We just put ourselves into a certain kind of relationship to them when we apprehend them, or maybe when we understand them. And so thought, this is also the level where truth is taking place too. This is the only sense in which truth meaningfully is relevant. Right? Truth is a property of some thoughts. Some thoughts are true. Not all thoughts are true, because of course, there are also false thoughts. And so this is the only level where truth or falsehood makes any sense. All right, so that's just review from what we said last time. Any thoughts, questions, comments, anything just based on that review? All right. So the question where we sort of ended last time, I ended with I was put all this kind of like hypothetically. Put all this as a kind of hypothesis. The claim that if everything that Frege is making right, you have to think that the realm of thoughts exists. If you think that science exists. So we can put it up to this point, at least, we can put this as sort of a hypothesis. Why? Because if all there is an outer world and your ideas maybe about that outer world, there's no possibility of anything being true and false, and there's no possibility of people collaboratively working on anything to come to a better understanding of it. everything on the level of ideas is completely private. Everything in the outer world is almost just like untouchable. You can sense it, but your senses of the outer world are themselves just ideas. So you actually would have basically no access to the outer world whatsoever. You would only have access to the inner world of your thoughts, and those are not shareable, don't correspond to anything. Therefore, no science, no nothing. What he does today is he tries to prove basically that science does exist. And so if science exists, therefore, so too do thoughts. Think here, what's going to be super weird, think back to Kant's critique of the empiricist tradition and the rationalist tradition. The nexus of Kant's critique is that early modern thought does not properly take into account that the role that the subject plays, the I, the transcendental subject, plays in consciousness. All it's aware of are sort of representations, ideas, and an outer world. Well, that logically then creates a kind of skeptical worry. How do I know that the inner world is anything like the outer world? Right? Frege is making that even worse and just saying that definitionally it is not, actually. So definitionally, they could not be alike in any meaningful sense. And it also overlooks the fact that of what I am. So I am the thing that gets lost in both empiricism and sort of, maybe Spinozian rationalism. Okay, what we're going to do today is use the I to prove this. So the project is vaguely Cartesian, right? It's still in this Cartesian tradition, in a sense. He's going to use the existence of the I to prove everything else, or to prove everything else, at least in a certain sense. But what he's going to mean by this I is very different than what Descartes means by it. Or at least he's going to suggest that Descartes meant something really ambiguous by the I. So we need to get clear on what the I means before we can go and do anything else. So let's just pause for a second. Any questions, thoughts, comments so far? All right, then let's start talking about the I. So we'll go back to the board in a second, but let's just talk about the I for a few seconds. All right, so if I say to you all, man, my ear really hurts. I think I have an ear infection. True story. Whatever. So I say that sentence to you. What does the I mean to all of you? What sense does the word I have to all of you in that sentence?
Was that rhetorical?
No, yeah, go ahead. No, I actually want you to try to answer it.
I think it would be my interpretation of the conditions that you are experiencing when you say I have an earache. Almost like
a little bit more.
Yeah, like an empathetic understanding of like, I understand what an earache. My personal experience. Mm-hmm. I know what an earache feels like, and I would project that sensation onto you, and try to empathize with your experience of having an earache.
So all of that's good and fine, and Frege agrees with all of it.
God damn it.
What was the I in that sentence?
You were the I. Yeah.
You are the collection of experiences and thoughts that is experiencing that earache.
Okay, so I am a collection of experiences and thoughts. When I say I have an earache, I in that sentence is a collection of experiences and thoughts has an earache. No, that's what I mean by sense. Right? We're talking about the sense of the I, not its reference.
Sense of the I. Okay.
Its reference is me, but the senses, they're supposed to be so if the sense of the I in that sentence is a collection of ideas, then we could replace the word I with a collection of ideas has an earache.
So maybe this is cheating, but I would probably say like a rational temporal subject.
All that's still fine, but like you're not actually getting narrowing it down, because you say a collection of rational rationally collected ideas and whatnot is having an earache.
It's more specific than that. It's that, like, you yourself have the collection of rational thoughts, but you yourself aren't that. It's a little bit more complicated, but it's a lot more specific than what we're getting at now. So when I say I'm talking about me. But when you guys think of when I say I, you're talking about the person on the other side of your screen whose camera isn't on. Like, you have an idea of me in your head, whether that's like correct or wrong, like we're not even talking about that, but like you have a sense of me in your head. And when I say I, you talk about that.
You're exactly on the right track, Rachel, but separate the idea we have of you in our head from the sense that the word I has.
Okay.
He wants to keep those, everything else you said was exactly right.
Can you repeat that? I'm just going to like shove that into my brain so then I can go further.
Yeah. Because let me just continue right from where you were, because where you were is exactly right. When I say the sentence, I have an earache, the I in that, the sense of that I to all of you is not the same as the sense that that word has for me. My sense of the I is this thing that's feeling, has this idea of pain in itself, has this sensation of pain. Your sense of I is something like the guy who's talking in the Zoom window. Right? We don't mean the same thing when we say the word I. Right? Even on the level of sense, we're not even talking about how you picture me. Right? I picture myself one way, you picture me a different way. But the word doesn't even have the same sense. Okay, so what sense does it have to me? What's my sense of myself? So you all are talking about your sense of me saying the word I in that sentence. What's my sense, or let's say you say such a sentence, what is your sense of the I insofar as it refers to yourself?
The I is myself. I'm talking about myself, and I guess like my sensation with the earache, and then so I guess it's basically my sense of I is myself, their sense of me saying I is still me, but then the senses are different because we have different perspectives on ourselves, kind of, I guess.
Reflective? Like a reflective sense?
Let's combine those two ideas. Let's combine those two, exactly. Like, my sense of myself is myself as a self-consciousness. Your sense of me is as a consciousness.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that checks out.
And you're aware that in some sense I am self-conscious. So it's not like as if you deny my self-consciousness, right? But the sense that the word I has for me is the self-conscious, self-reflective, I'm the one having this pain feeling. Whereas your all sense of me is as a consciousness that's having a pain feeling, but I'm not having the pain feeling. It's not my consciousness that's having the pain feeling. Now let's make it weirder. If you were to describe me to someone else, or if I was to describe me to someone else, we wouldn't do it in any of that language. Right? Now, when I picture, let's say I'm picturing myself to myself, I don't picture a self-consciousness. That's not even picturable. How do I picture myself? Well, probably as I was 10 years ago. For you all, you're not there yet. You all probably actually picture yourself more or less as you are now. For me, like, I look probably like, there's a bit less gray in my beard. little salt and pepper flakes in my beard when I'm picturing myself. Maybe I picture myself wearing some particular piece of clothing, maybe not one that I'm currently wearing. Maybe I picture myself as being a good teacher. Maybe I picture myself as being really fast. Who knows? Maybe I could also picture myself in false ways, right? Like I can think things about myself that aren't true. Neither of those, that is not the same thing as either your sense of the I nor my sense of the I. Let's go back to the whiteboard now. you have a sense of yourself, and you have an idea of yourself. And these are not the same. These are completely different. Your sense of yourself and the idea you have of yourself. So let's try to make that clear. Let's try to prove this.
Husserl likes Frege? Is this what Husserl's using?
I imagine it's, I would imagine this is part of it. I would imagine so.
Okay.
Yeah, because I'm going to erase this this three ontology stuff. Does anyone still want this left up? All right, let's do Frege's version of Descartes then. Let's do Frege's version of skepticism. So he imagines two different versions of it. There's an idealist version of skepticism and a materialist version. The idealist version is that everything is just an idea. Inside my mind, and there are nothing but ideas. Right. And so on this version of skepticism, so the Pythagorean theorem isn't a thought. Right? It's not something independent of me. It's just some idea that I have the weird other idea about that it's independent of me. Right? So it's just an idea that has other weird ideas associated with it. Right? So this is one version of skepticism. He also considers a materialist version of skepticism. Everything is basically just a brain state. I'm simplifying. The way he actually does this is more complicated, but let's just reduce it to everything is just a brain state. Right. And so again, there's no thoughts, there's just a brain state. The Pythagorean theorem is just a particular state of my brain. It's just some brain state, and that brain state corresponds or is connected with various other brain states. Again, that I have this false idea that the brain state is independent of me. So we have sort of a pure idealism and a pure materialism. Everything is objects or everything is ideas. Notice both of these are the exact same thing. That's bizarrely, these boil down to or reduced to the exact same thing. One, in both cases, everything is relative to the subject of either the idea or the brain state. We just call them different things. We call, in the idealist version, we call it a mind. In the materialist version, we call it a brain. But everything is still relative to that mind or brain. In both cases, you have no connection to the external world whatsoever. The external world, it remains entirely opaque to you. That's just, it's super weird. I've never heard anyone actually put it this way, but I think he's entirely right. If you are a real materialist, what you believe is that everything you are conscious of is just some state within your brain. That state in your brain could be generated independently of any actual objects being present in the world. That's the more complicated way he does it, is basically, he says that what I'm calling brain states, he calls perceptual states, where like certain nerves get impacted in such and such a way. But it's quite apparent that you can generate those same effects on the nerves without there being the sort of normal correspondence of an object that causes it. So I see this pen. Why do I see this pen? I think normally I see this pen because light bounces off of this, hits such and such a wavelength, hits my eye at such and such a wavelength, a bunch of nerves fire. But if I could just make those nerves directly fire, I don't need the pen, I don't need light, I don't need anything else. I could be a brain in a vat and have the exact same option. Both of these are actually idealist in a very weird sense, just different kinds of idealism. It's just in the second case, in the materialist version, an idea is just like a brain pattern. But it has all the same characteristics, actually, that it does in the idealist version. It's just different names for the exact same thing.
I have a quick question, if that's okay.
Yeah, please. I was going to pause here anyway. Yeah, go ahead.
So, why is he subscribing still to the Cartesian dualism? Not dualism. Well, I guess dualism a little bit, right? In that the mind or the brain state experiences the world in its own way, separate from the body, and I feel like that's been thoroughly refuted enough by Hegel and everyone that preceded him for him to not make that claim so readily, you know?
Which, say it a little bit more, exactly which claim is the one you're finding objectionable?
Yeah, the idea of the brain in a vat, in that you can just create and engage nerve impulses or whatever it may be to invoke some kind of, or evoke some kind of imagery, especially in relation to other people, intersubjectively.
Yeah, notice we were not I mean, he's not endorsing this, to be perfectly clear. He's going to critique. Okay. He's critiquing both of these. All right. Gotcha. And yeah, so maybe just save that idea for a few minutes, because his goal is to critique all this. But one thing we can indeed say on both of these, again, there is no intersubjectivity. That's at least an addition we can make. Okay.
All right. Knowing that he's not arguing for this clears it up. Okay, I'm good.
Yes, he is not arguing in favor of this view. Yeah. What's he doing? And to be clear, what's he doing? He's suggesting both of these are versions of denying that there are thoughts. He's showing that if you deny that there's thoughts in either way, you're going to end up in the same place and you're going to end up in relativism. Okay. And so, no science as well. All right, because science is non-relative and intersubjective. And it's about the external world. Right. So on both of these, and weirdly, the reason you would be this materialist version, why would you be this materialist? Well, precisely because of your love of science. Right? That's what would motivate you to give this kind of account. Presumably, actually, something similar is true about the idealist version, would also be motivated by a version of science, though perhaps a different version. All right. Any questions, thoughts, comments at this point? Rowan, yeah, I see you raising your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, so it seems to me that like there's a weird thing going on here where like psychology seems to support this like skepticism in a sense, because I mean, we know that like we can go into brains and stimulate certain neurons and then we do get certain things appear.
Yep.
But, like
that is correct. And indeed,
so what Frege is saying, yeah. But like once we have that, like if we accept that, we can't actually understand that at all, is Frege is saying, because we can't have science if we
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. What Frege is arguing, and he's very explicit about this, he says this directly at one point. What Frege is arguing against is the psychologization of human intellect.
Of human
Intellect, logic, math, science, of everything. The psychologization of everything.
Okay, interesting.
Because it would even undermine psychology as a science. Psychology as a science only makes sense if there are thoughts.
Yeah, it's a weird little self-defeating thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And should make us think back perhaps of Nietzsche or something, right? Nietzsche's recognition that if science destroys itself, what conclusion can we draw from that? And Frege is just more taking effect for it. Therefore, psychology is doing something wrong. Psychology is misunderstanding its own results.
Right. Cool. Great. Awesome.
Yeah. Good. Any others? All right. So let's now derive the fundamental contradiction. This produces both versions. So we can since they come to the same thing. Let's just call this both of these kinds of idealism. So we can both kinds of idealism. We'll just call these kinds of idealism now. Very weird thing to note, but again, I think this is a really fun way of thinking back on everything we've been talking about this semester. Modern psychology, if you're right, Rowan, it's idealist. Everything is about ideas and their relation, right? Even if it's doing the materialist version of that, whether it's doing the Freudian version or the sort of more neurobiology version of it, doesn't matter. They're both idealist. They both say there is nothing but consciousness and things that are in consciousness, just either explained as brain states or explained as ideas, doesn't matter. They're both, and all of modern thinking is idealist, if Frege is right. Because we moderns all tend toward, well, it's all just ideas inside your mind anyway. There is no objectivity. That means we're all idealists in a kind of Kantian or like a pseudo-Kantian sense. All right. What is the paradox here? What am I if either form of idealism is true? Well, I am an idea. Or a brain state, but again, a brain state is just like another word for an idea. They both refer to the same phenomenon. Okay. Where are my ideas? Then, are my ideas inside my idea of myself? They're in my idea of my brain? Are they in my idea of my consciousness? None of that makes any sense. Ideas have to be in something. But in both forms of idealism, there is literally nothing for them to be in. And so something has to be wrong here. Something has to be missing from this account. In Kant, he called this transcendental subjectivity. Frege doesn't call it this, obviously, but this is to tie it back into the Kant stuff we've been doing. My ideas are the ideas of me, including my idea of myself. They're in me, and this sense of me cannot be an idea or a brain state. I can maybe even have an idea of it, but that's not it, right? Picture your truths. I can do the Cartesian thing. I can imagine that there's like some true me inside of me, like piloting me like a homunculus or whatever. Fine, have that idea all you want. That idea is not the transcendental subject. That is not you as you are in yourself. And indeed, it can never be an idea for itself. I will never have an idea actually of myself that corresponds with what I actually am. Or, let's put this slightly differently, with the thought of what I am. And this is his proof of thoughts. Because you have to know that there is a distinction between you and your idea of yourself, that has to be a thought. That can't just be another idea without just falling back into the same infinite regress. There is at least one subject of thought, namely the I. Again, let's pause. How are we doing? This making sense? All right. If this is the case, then we can derive everything we need from it. Right? Gives rise to intersubjectivity, because I can also say that my ideas of other people are different from who they are. The same move that I can do with myself, I can now do it, at least in principle, conceptually, with others. And he imagines the skeptic coming back, but don't you know yourself more than you know anyone else? And he's like, sure, whatever, but I don't care. That's beside the point, right? Now I have the conceptual space, at least, to say that other people are indeed other people, not just ideas inside my head. And that's enough for science, because now we can, all of us, talk about one of my ideas. We can all think about my ideas. And so his example here is actually literally the one that I was just using. I have my idea, so I have my own pain, like my own ear pain. What is that? That is an idea inside of myself, and I can think to myself, wow, my ear is in pain. Right? So I can have that thought. But you all can also have the thought, wow, Paul's ear is in pain. And what you're talking about, weirdly, is one of my ideas, but you're not talking about me as an idea. It's not your idea of me who you're saying has pain. It's the I that has pain, the Paul that has pain, this transcendental subject that has the pain. And so there have to be thoughts if you are aware of yourself as something. You can distinguish your idea of yourself from what your ideas are in. There must be thoughts that are not ideas, that do not reduce to ideas. Go ahead. Any questions, thoughts, comments? Ro, I think I see you there, but you're really tiny, so it's hard for me to see.
Yeah, no worries. What if we said like you're not aware of yourself?
Then how are you talking to me?
Well, through, I mean, I don't know. What if we just...
If you could say, yes, I have no awareness of myself, I am just a free flow of ideas.
Yeah.
I suppose. Then you're crazy, I guess, right? I mean, then you're literally Fichte's dogmatist. Then you're literally Fichte's dogmatist, right? You're just like, you have not awoken to yourself, and you just think you are a free-flowing bundle of ideas bouncing around from pain sensation to pain sensation and yada, yada, yada. Fine. But you can be aware of yourself, right? I mean, but
yeah,
like,
it seems like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of phenomenological claim, right? Like, you're aware of this distinction. If you're not aware of this distinction, I suppose you're not going to find the argument persuasive. But a whole bunch of other stuff is going to be pretty weird too if you don't accept the distinction.
Yeah, it's a bit of a non-starter.
Yeah, you're going to be pretty hard to talk with for all kinds of other reasons if you can't tell this difference. If you can't distinguish this.
Okay.
And certainly, you're not going to be the psychologist who thinks they're doing rigorous science when they're saying it's all just ideas in the mind.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, it's this weird, like, because it is like, you can always just refuse to accept this fact. And Fichte says the same thing. You can always just refuse to accept this, but like, I don't know what else to do at that point then, right? Like you're making it impossible for us to have a philosophical conversation in the first place. So
yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. It's okay. Cool. I'll think about that.
Yeah, sort of a performative contradiction. Not a logical contradiction, a performative contradiction.
Yeah, it goes against experience, definitely.
Yeah.
So
and it goes against the very science that was supposed to be establishing it in the first place, too.
Right. Yeah, because then you can't build anything on that idea.
Yep.
So
yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yep. Yeah, it would just be free association. It'd almost just be like literally all if science reduced to free association or something. Then it's not science.
So was that kind of like what David Hume was saying that
yeah.
Okay.
And in fairness to Hume, what does he do? He stops doing philosophy. He's like, oh, so I'm gonna give up philosophy then because this is pretty dumb, right? This is pretty pointless.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely right. He just throws out metaphysics.
Yep. And Frege just says you'd have to throw out even more than that. Like you have to give up more than you think. You'd also have to give up history and morality and science, like a whole bunch of other stuff that Hume still does have a commitment to, especially history. I mean, that's what Hume is most famous for, probably, outside of philosophy, is his histories of the British Isles. But yeah, like, the Frege is just like, no, you can't do any of that because history too is intersubjective, non-relational, and so like you can't do any of this unless you grant this sort of like weird transcendental subjectivity thing that Kant was talking about. And what's so weird is he doesn't do anything with the transcendental, like, so what does German idealism do? German idealism takes a transcendental subject and runs with it, right? Like that's the whole foundation of the German idealist system, basically, in Hegel and Fichte, is like this idea of transcendental subjectivity. Frege doesn't do anything with it. He just like points to it and says like, therefore there are thoughts. Therefore there is this third order of thinking. That's neither the objects in the world, nor is it the ideas inside your mind.
Do you think he just assumed that was so substantiated that he didn't have to make any more claims to it because of like Hegel and Kant?
I mean, he's not a German idealist. He has very bad things to say about Hegel, at the very least. He thinks Hegel's just a bunch of nonsense.
I feel like everyone does, I guess.
Yeah, just because he's so Hegel indeed sounds like a bunch of nonsense. Like I had you read the most intelligible parts of Hegel, and it still was rough going.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, from this whole, because all of this is coming from his philosophy of language, and from Frege's perspective, there's just a whole host of sense reference confusions throughout Hegel's thinking. Right? It's just wildly unambiguous sentences meaning wildly ambiguous things.
Fair enough. I think well, I mean, even with, you can do the same with Kant. Isn't that what Schopenhauer was pointing out? That his whole idea of concepts. People
think Kant is at least better. And like Frege has some issues with Kant, but he at least speaks positively of Kant in some contexts. Some other contexts. But yeah, like, he doesn't want to do German idealism at the very least.
Okay.
And he doesn't do anything with transcendental subjectivity. Let's go back to the question Jonathan asked at the beginning of class. Thoughts, like, you would expect thought to play some sort of causal role in everything, and it doesn't. Thoughts do not cause anything in the world. They're not Platonic forms in that sense. The Pythagorean theorem doesn't cause triangles to be made with such and such sides or whatever. It's just any triangle in the world is going to obey the Pythagorean theorem when you think about it. The only causal effect that he says thinking has is it has a causal effect on us. When we apprehend something in thought, it causes us to act in particular ways in the world. But the objective world is just out there and has its objective properties, and one of those properties corresponds maybe to the Pythagorean theorem. It's sort of hard to say, right? But like, at the very least, when we think the Pythagorean theorem, we are thinking something that is objective, true, and universal, and in some sense or whatever is telling us about the external world, even though that thought is not the external world and wasn't causally generative of the external world either. And so, yeah, the connection between the external world and thinking, as Jonathan asked, he's not super clear. There's got to be some connection to it, because thinking does tell us about the external world not even to some extent. Thinking tells us about the external world. It's just thinking is not, thoughts are not the external world. And so what kind of thing are thoughts? And what kind of thing is the external world? This remains, I think, a real question in Frege's thinking. I mean, if you're Plato, what do you say? You actually just say the external world is thought. What he's calling external world, call that thought, call that form, right? That's what Plato actually does with it. Everything else is the same, very similar at least, what Frege is doing between Plato's theory of the forms. So Plato's theory of the forms is intrinsically causal, and Frege's working from a modern sense of causality, where objects cause things that cause other objects to behave in certain ways. But he's just not worried about any of this, because all he cares about is preserving science, and he just preserved science. Science is preserved. Right? The psychologization of human intellectual life we've disproven it. Can't be right, because even psychology itself wouldn't make sense as a science. It's super weird. What he's doing here is super weird, and like he dies shortly after this. And other people don't really develop this that much. This like influences other people in weird ways, but like this isn't like, people don't exactly take this idea up and run with it or whatever. And it'd be fascinating to see what would happen if we took this idea and ran with it, because the framework he's laying out here is really different than anything I've seen before. It's close to Plato, but it's really different in a lot of ways. And it's similar to Kant, but it's really different. It's more different from Kant in a lot of ways. Yeah, it's super cool. I at least find this fascinating, so I hope you all find it equally fascinating as roads, at least, that have not yet been taken in philosophy, and perhaps could be in the future. Who knows? All right, we are out of time, so that's all I had for today. Does anyone have any last thoughts? Last questions? Anything? All right. Well, thank you very much for finishing our play with Frege and Frege's oddity. We'll have one last class meeting on Wednesday where we just sort of do big picture end of semester stuff. So that'll be pretty light going. Probably won't use the whole time. So see you all then. Have a good one, and I will talk to you later. Bye.
Thank you for today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.